We have the United States flip-flopping back and forth with how to handle Israel and the Gaza situation. We have the FBI warning about attacks on the United States and on Israel. We have the Biden administration looking for an off-ramp with the Russia-Ukraine war, and they might be blaming China. To help me understand everything, I have ex-CIA Larry Johnson. Larry, thank you for coming on the show again.
I have all the answers.
Well, I just like to filter it through your brain.
Sure.
So, first thing I wanted to get your feedback on is the FBI has put out a bulletin that there could be an imminent attack within the United States, similar to what happened at the music hall in Moscow, Russia. They specifically name ISIS, but then their language points towards it just being a group that has snuck in across the southern border. For me, the FBI has burned its bridges with my trust, but how likely is something like this to happen if the FBI is talking about it, or is this just fear porn to make us all, afraid?
Fear porn. I don't trust the FBI anymore. I think the FBI has lost total credibility. They've lied repeatedly. They've been involved with running operations against American patriots. They've targeted Catholics over their opposition to abortion. I seriously, and I say this as someone who worked closely with the FBI during my time in the counterterrorism field and subsequent to that as a consultant. But anything that comes out of Chris Wray's mouth, I'd put in the category of lying first and foremost, because, so there's, oh, we could get attacked at a concert. Okay, what are you doing about it to stop it? What, you want Americans to stop going to concerts? Well, no. Okay, then what's your point? Because what are you asking people to do? Are you asking to be afraid of Muslims? Except what we saw at Crocus City Center in Moscow was not a good group of fanatical Muslims. These guys were dressed up to play Muslims. They put out a video beforehand of swearing the Shahada, which is, there is no God but God and Muhammad is a prophet. It's basically the confession that you make when you join Islam. Well, normally when people make that confession in Islam, they do it with their right hand raised. Now, you notice behind me, you can see posters. And those posters aren't backwards. So this is my right hand. Well, these guys were in a movie doing this, left hand. And for the left-handed people out there, I'm not saying that you're bad people, but within the Arab culture, this left hand is used for toilet duty. And so it's considered unclean. And so you don't do the confession to God with your left hand. That's what these guys, all four of them, you can understand one of them maybe being a lefty, but all four of them, no. Mercenaries for hire, they were clearly hired by the West. There are the very strange activities by the CIA in conjunction with this. First of all, they put out this warning that that there was going to be a terrorist attack within 48 hours. Now, when do you start the 48-hour? So I've been the recipient of intelligence where there's possibility of a terrorist attack. I have never seen saying that, oh, the attack will take place within the next week, or it'll take place in 2 weeks. 48 hours. So once that cable is out, is that when the 48-hour period started? And then once that 48-hour period lapsed, then the CIA reportedly went back to the Russians and said, oh, the terrorist attack's still viable. Well, if they believe that, why didn't they warn the public again? Now, I have firsthand experience with this. When I joined State Department Office of Counterterrorism on the 3rd of October, 1989, one of our first jobs was to clarify the policy on warning the public about a potential terrorist threat, because there was the perception that the U.S. government had warned CIA and State Department employees not to get on board Pan Am 103, and that therefore the passengers who were not alerted went to their death. Now, it was not true, but that was the perception. So to deal both with that perception and to have a very clear policy, we came up with the policy was this: if you have credible information, but it's not of such specific nature that you can prevent it. In other words, if I had information that, hey, the Stephen Gardner character on Friday or Saturday is going to carry out a mass shooting at this particular location, well, that's pretty specific. I'll go out and get you. We'll stop it. We get control of you. We stopped it. But that's not what happened here. They didn't have that kind of specificity. And so when they issued that first warning, which was specific for 48 hours, at no point did they come back and say, well, you know what? Nothing happened in that 48-hour period, thank God, but the terrorist threat's still viable. What then happened is CIA starts leaking to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Seymour Hersh. Oh, yeah, we told they get different stories. Oh, we told the Russians everything, and they ignored it. It's their fault. Except the New York Times admitted, well, okay, the CIA held back important information. Yeah, what might that have been? So the way I look at it, the cynical version is 2 days before the 22nd of March attack, the United States leaked, the intelligence community leaked to the Financial Times of London that they were really concerned about what they viewed as Ukrainian unauthorized brazen attacks. And boy, these Ukrainians are out of control. We can't handle what they do. And then there's on X, there's something called OSI Open Source Intelligence Defender, okay, and basically been used as a mouthpiece for the intelligence community. Put out the same message: unauthorized brazen attacks. So then the attack occurs 2 days later. The cynical part of me says, you know what? They released that public warning in early March in order to set the stage. Okay, hey, we've warned that there could be a terrorist attack. Time goes by. Then they claim that they told the Russians, and we've now positioned ourselves that those crazy Ukrainians, they can, no telling what they're going to do. And then when the attack happens, within the attack is not even over. We don't know how many are dead. The building's on fire. The fire is not put out. We don't know if there are hostages. We don't know anything. And the Biden administration comes out immediately. It was not Ukraine.
Yeah.
Well, you're not that good, guys. Or if you know that it's not Ukraine, that means you know who did it. You know who was responsible. Oh, it was ISIS-K. Well, does that mean that you trained him? Did you facilitate the money for him? Because now let me give you the additional twist that makes this even more curious. This week, the investigative committee in Russia came out and said, hey, we've got evidence that Burisma, that's a gas company in Ukraine, was involved with financing terrorist activity. They didn't say the Crocus City attack, but financing terrorist activity. Well, who's on the board? Well, Hunter Biden. But more important than Hunter Biden is the guy that Hunter Biden helped bring onto the board of Burisma, J. Cofer Black. Cofer Black was a career CIA officer. He was responsible, to his credit, for the capture of Carlos the Jackal in Sudan back in 1994. He was head of the Counterterrorism Center in 2001 when the 9/11 attacks happened. He then left the agency, retired, moved to State Department, to my old office, where he became the coordinator for counterterrorism. I had I'd left 9 years, 10 years earlier. And then after getting a stint there where he gets the title of ambassador, he then goes out into the private sector, becomes chairman, I believe, of Blackwater. And then in 2016, he's named to the board of a bank in Latvia. I think it was called the Baltic Bank. And when he was being interviewed by a business magazine, they said, well, hey, why did you get on board this brought onto this board. He goes, well, my background in counterterrorism involved terrorism finance, so I'm up to speed and aware of this stuff. Oh, really? So then a year later, he's named to the board of Burisma. So now you have a CIA officer that's on Burisma, that's also on the board of this bank. And guess what? There are financial transactions between Burisma and that bank. And in 2018, the bank is sanctioned for money laundering and terrorism finance. It's fined. Coincidence? Unhappy coincidence? And I know firsthand about this compliance programs with banks because I've written those programs. That was part of what my company, my consulting firm, what we did. We created compliance programs for banks and financial institutions to prevent money laundering. The very first case we worked on when we formed Berg Associates in 1998 was the Bank of New York Russian money laundering case. So I know all about this. And the fact of the matter is, Cofer Black didn't know a damn thing about it. He was just put on because of his association with the CIA and the titles.
Yeah.
And yet, what was he doing on the board of Burisma? And now that we know that Burisma's activities, it is alleged that Burisma's activities were involved with financing terrorism. Needs to be investigated. Right now, it stands as allegations from the Russians. One other data point. There is a IRS whistleblower that came forward to the Republicans that claimed when the IRS was trying to investigate Hunter Biden's foreign financial contacts, that when they were warned by the CIA that they could not talk to his lawyer. Now, the CIA has denied that. The whistleblower insists, no, the CIA is lying. Oh, heavens, well, the CIA would never lie to us. Yeah, they don't have a good record on the credibility front, okay? So I said, there's a lot of smoke here, and it needs to be investigated. So I look forward to seeing what evidence the Russians finally proffer with respect to establishing Burisma's ties to funding terrorism activity. And I'll be particularly interested to see, is there a CIA angle through Cofer Black?
Yeah. Wow. Well, we know Biden won't want it investigated. Anything that has to do with Hunter Biden
right.
won't be investigated until Trump or somebody else gets back in office. I do want to talk about some CIA lies, but just sticking with the Russia thing. Russia is very convinced that Ukraine funded these attackers.
Yeah.
But the media is saying it can't be so. Putin's crazy. He's always trying to tie everything back to Ukraine to justify his attack on them. Do you think Russia knows something that we don't about the funding coming through Ukraine?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, number one, they've got access to the suspects. So normally in this kind of investigation, even if you didn't have the suspects, you take the physical evidence of what you've collected. You get the guns. Guns have serial numbers. Where were those firearms manufactured? And then start doing the trace. Who did they sell it to? Who was the distributor? And see if you can build that chain of custody for that. The car. Who bought the car that they were traveling in? Where did the money come from that? These guys had multiple trips to Turkey. That's an airplane trip. Those are not $50 flights. That's some significant money. Who bought the tickets? And then where did they stay? What hotels? Who was paying for that? How was it paid for? Was it paid for in cash? Was it paid for in credit? So Russia's got that advantage of being able to track the money. And they've already got evidence, they claim, with cryptocurrency, which candidly, cryptocurrency is with the blockchain. It's real easy to follow the chain of custody on that, back to point of origin. So you've got the combination of live suspects with all this other forensic evidence that they can track. And so it'll be a piece of, I think absolutely the Russians know a lot more than they're revealing. And I think it's definitely going to be implicating people in the West. At a minimum, CIA knew it was going to happen. and didn't do anything to really effectively warn the Russians on how to prevent it.
Yeah.
Because their plan, the agency goal, was to hopefully use this attack as a means to go after Vladimir Putin's credibility and accuse him of being weak on security and endangering the lives of Russian people, because the goal of the CIA is to destroy Vladimir Putin.
Wow. Okay, I knew you would better understand that than me. So thank you for that. The other thing that I had texted you was this undercover journalist. I just forgot the name of the group. Anyway, they get this CIA contractor out of California talking over different multiple lunches. He starts revealing that the CIA is tracking Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson and a few others. The guy then reveals that he knows for a fact there was at least 20 FBI agents in the crowd on January 6th because he works with them personally.
Yeah.
So what more could you tell us about this? I was pretty shocked. I mean, I don't want to say shocked. That's the wrong word, because I had my suspicions that these two were probably being trailed or monitored. It's now been confirmed. What are your thoughts on the story? That's a better question.
Well, number one, this guy that was talking, he wouldn't have been hired back in '85 when I was there, because they didn't allow homosexuals into the agency, at least openly homosexual. And that's how this undercover journalist got this. This guy thought he was getting a date. So
you know that's exactly how
James O'Keefe.
Yes, James O'Keefe. Same thing. He pretends to go on a date with one of Biden's top White House people, and he starts spilling the beans. Oh yeah, Biden's very tired. He's slowing down and doesn't remember stuff a lot. Okay, so sorry, keep going.
So the agency is not supposed to spy on Americans, but I know for a fact from another friend of mine, a former agency employee who he retired as what they call Senior Intelligence Service, SIS, which means he was the equivalent of a general, that in the summer of 2015, John Brennan set up a task force specifically to spy on all the presidential campaign candidates other than Hillary Clinton. So they were spying on Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, not just Donald Trump, and Bernie Sanders. So, this is not new, and this is what has happened to the agency. It needs to be burnt to the ground. It needs to be dismantled. It has become so overtly politicized. It can't be trusted anymore. The same with the FBI. Both organizations have discredited themselves. They become no different than the KGB was during the Soviet Union, a tool of the Communist Party. In this case, they become a tool of the Democrat Party.
Okay.
And what we call the deep state in Washington.
Why? I mean, we live in different times now, but did they feel like gay people were maybe more vulnerable to deception or flattery or
blackmail,
sexual activity, blackmail?
Blackmail, and that was, they asked it was called the lifestyle questions. They wanted to make sure they weren't hiring somebody who was, frequenting gay bathhouses or a serial adulterer. It was sort of, it's sort of a contradiction. On the one hand, you're asking people to come in to recruit others, and one of the recruitment techniques is to, find out if they have any human weaknesses and exploit those weaknesses to your advantage as a way to recruit them. But on the other hand, they want you to be honest. And, the funniest thing for me was this buddy of mine. He's a bishop in the Mormon church. And yet one of his intelligence assets that he had to take the guy to Las Vegas because the individual wanted to have a sexual experience with more than two women. And so here's this Mormon bishop walking around trying to line up hookers for this one source that he's running. It's just sort of a contradiction. And this is a little off topic, but one of the reasons the agency likes to hire Mormons as operators, field operators, is because most Mormons, when they go on their missions overseas, and you're learning a foreign language, and you're going out door to door talking to people, basically recruiting, the trying to convert people to the gospel is a lot like trying to recruit somebody to spy for you for the United States of America. Same kind of process. It's a form of salesmanship.
Yeah.
So that's why, if you will, Mormons are sort of uniquely trained in that regard. They come with some advantages of how to interact with people, read social cues, and get that recruitment going.
Yeah.
But with this guy, this thing was, um, this is typical of why this guy shouldn't be a contracting officer at CIA. They ought to fire him.
Yeah.
But I think he was telling the absolute truth. He may have been bragging a little bit, about embellishing because, he's hoping to get lucky with his date.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of using that to your advantage, I mean, just look at everything that's going on in the media right now with Puff Daddy, P. Diddy.
Yeah.
They're now saying, wait a minute, is this the Jeffrey Epstein of the music industry, where he's using basically blackmail tactics, video recorded sexual encounters to get people to comply, to do what you want, to dominate them, to own them, so that you can use them to make millions or billions of dollars off of their musical talents.
Yeah, so it comes back to the question, why now? Why is all this just coming out now? It's been apparently been known for quite a while, or is it true? Um, you know, I've developed the habit of being immediately skeptical whenever the media paints this particular portrait of, basically P. Diddy's a bad guy. Well, maybe he is, but let's actually see some evidence before we jump on that train and or lynch him, put him have mob violence against him. But it is, what we've discovered with like the Epstein affair. I believe he was murdered, and he was murdered because he had information about prominent people that was embarrassing, and they wanted to keep that quiet. Now, who did that? I don't know. But it's clear that he didn't hang himself. That wasn't happening.
Yeah, if only those security cameras hadn't conveniently gone out right
Yeah,
when
magic.
it was happening.
Just magic.
Okay. Israel makes an attack on the Iran embassy in Syria. Iran is now saying every Israeli embassy is fair game. When you are most vulnerable, we are going to attack. What are your thoughts on that? Are these real threats?
Yeah, actually, I don't think Iran's going to strike back at any Israeli embassy or consulate. Iran, I think, is going to show that it's different. What an irony this is. Because if you go back to 1979, in the first year of the Iranian Revolution, the students, we'll put quotation marks around there, that stormed the U.S. Embassy, violated the sanctity of the U.S. Embassy, and held hostages for 400 plus days, only released on inauguration day of Ronald Reagan. So at that time, the United States was outraged, as we should have been, that this embassy was violated in such a way. Now let's jump ahead 45 years later. Just last week at the UN Security Council, here you had Iran complaining about this violation of its diplomatic facility. And who was opposing Iran in this? The United States. So wait a second. I thought embassies and consulates were sacrosanct. You're not supposed to allow them to be overrun. Well, this international rules-based order people talk about. It gets changed conveniently only when it suits our purposes. So generally speaking, yeah, embassies, consulates are off limits, unless it's the Iranians or the Mexicans. Just you saw what Ecuador did to the Mexican embassy down in Quito. Stormed it, dragged out a former Ecuadorian vice president that had sought sanctuary in the embassy. So this this notion that embassies are no longer safe places, if you want to make that the standard, okay. But that's why I say I don't think Iran's going to bomb any embassy or diplomatic facility, because I think they understand that if they do that, they're doing the same thing that the Israelis did, and they're actually trying to show that they're morally superior to Israel, that they're not going to be killing women and children like Israel. So, and you remember, like within 48 hours of that attack, the United States intelligence community was warning Israel there's going to be an attack within 48 hours. I don't know what it is about this 48 hours. Are they like Nick Nolte, Eddie Murphy fans, going back to the movie? They keep 48 hours. Well, nothing happened there either. It's been more than 48 hours. The West is making a very, very serious mistake with Iran. We think that we can defeat Iran militarily, and we can't. And what's my evidence for that? We can't even defeat the Houthis, for God's sake, okay? We've had an aircraft carrier and destroyers off its shore now going on almost 6 months, and we haven't stopped the rockets and missiles coming out of Yemen. Iran has more sophisticated weapons than Yemen, than the Houthis in Yemen do, by a dramatic edge. And Iran, if push comes to shove, can shut down that Gulf of Hormuz, shut down all oil coming out of the Persian Gulf if the West tries to confront it. And the West can't reopen it. They can't. We can't reopen the Red Sea. Think about that. Now, if we had gone right in and opened it up, but that's not the case. If we can't reopen the Red Sea against the Houthis, how in the name of God do we think that we're going to reopen the Persian Gulf against Iran? Wake up.
Wow. Why do you think the Biden administration is so flip-floppy with Israel? One day they're, praising them, the next they're saying you're almost indistinguishable from Hamas in your behavior. Then they're calling for a ceasefire. Then they're saying we don't really need a ceasefire. Now they're saying that we have an ironclad commitment. Is this all behind the scenes politicking going on?
Yeah.
Or does Joe Biden just not know how to make a decision?
Well, number one, Joe Biden in his history has been the number one recipient of funds from pro-Israeli groups. So he's raked in more cash than any other senator in history. So he's deeply in the pockets of the Israelis, number one. He recognizes that the Democrats have a political problem, particularly in areas like Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, where you have a sizable numbers of Arab American and Islamic Muslim American voters who traditionally have voted with the Democrats. They are outraged. They're calling him Genocide Joe. So what the Biden administration is trying to do is these public gestures. Yes, we're going to call for a ceasefire. Yes, we think we're warning Israel. Don't you do this. But then look at what they're actually doing. What are they doing? They're sending the bombs. They're sending the military equipment. They're not stopping that. They're sending it all over. And so, and yeah, they're coming out in opposition to Bibi Netanyahu. That's an easy one. That's a layup. Because you know what? If Israel gets rid of Bibi Netanyahu, the policy towards Gaza is not going to change. It's going to stay the same. So it is, you're right. It sure comes across as flip-flopping, sending mixed signals, as it were, but always look at what they're really doing. If they were withholding military aid, then I could say, oh yeah, you've seen a shift, a decided shift in the Biden administration policy. But that's not what we're seeing.
Yeah, the only shift I saw was no money to Israel or Ukraine until the border's fixed. Just kidding. We're going to get you every dime we can. Yeah. And so they didn't hold the line there. Okay, final question. Just today, Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana accused DHS head Alejandro Mayorkas of turning a blind eye on the southern border crisis because it disproportionately helps Democrats win and fouls up the electoral map and districting in favor of Democrat votes. Any truth to what Senator Kennedy is accusing him of?
Yeah, no, he's. I love Kennedy both for his sense of humor, number one, but and he's just, he's got that folksy aura about him. But no, I fully agree with him. I think that's a, the administration, Biden administration has been actively, aggressively funding foreign organizations to bring people to the United States. Now, there has been some concern saying, oh, they're bringing in all these military-age guys and they could rise up and carry out a terrorist attack. I don't know how much experience you have with firearms. I'm a firearms instructor. I know that if you don't train regularly with firearms, it's a perishable skill. It's not like riding a bike that you get back on and immediately know what to do. And so if you've got guys that have been, quote, infiltrated into the country, but then are sitting around for 6 months, 8 months without going through training, which I think it'd be pretty hard to hide, groups of young guys engaged with any kind of tactical training. I really don't think that they're that capable of carrying out, those kinds of terrorist attacks in vision. I think the bigger threat is what you just talked about with John Kennedy's view, that this is designed to boost the numbers in Democrat districts, that when the census is taken, that they will reallocate seats and take them away from Republican districts, because the Republicans are doing their best to try to keep this flood of immigrants out. And as the numbers are astronomical. They're in excess of 7 million in just the last year.
Yeah.
That's the size. That's larger than most states in the United States.
Yeah. Well, there's only one party that doesn't want voter ID. There's only one party that's not concerned about the border. And there's only one party that wants to get rid of the electoral voting style. And they're all the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
And so when he said that, when he accused him of trying to disrupt the electoral map, I was like, oh yes, that is very true. If they could pick up, turn Texas blue, like they did California, you just pick up so many electoral votes, Republicans never win again.
Yeah. Well, we ought to adopt the Puerto Rican system, because in Puerto Rico, when you register to vote, you got to have a birth certificate, you got to have proof of residency, you've got to bring in other documents to show that you are a citizen, that you reside in Puerto Rico. And they take a picture and issue a photo ID that when you come to vote, you have to present that ID or you're not allowed to vote. That's Puerto Rico. And we like to think of Puerto Rico as sort of a third world country. Well, good God, the United States is worse than any banana republic on terms of its voting procedures or lack thereof.
Interesting. I didn't know. I lived in Puerto Rico, and I didn't know that they were that in depth.
Yeah.
I thought you were adopting the model of issue a lot of money and then none of it makes it to the people or the roads. But
yeah, that's a whole nother issue.
America.
That's a whole nother issue. We got. I don't want to hear Washington D.C. politicians lecture any other country on issues of corruption. Look in the damn mirror, folks. You guys live in a glass house. Those who live in a glass house shouldn't be throwing rocks. Or as Jesus said, let them who are without sin cast the first stone. We got plenty of sin. We shouldn't be throwing rocks at anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Larry, thank you so much for coming on. If people want to continue to follow you, should they do that on sonar21.com?
That's the place. That'll take you everywhere you need to go.
Okay, I will make sure to leave a link down below. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you have a great rest of your week.
Hey, thank you, man.